Live from New York, this is BBC News. The White House rescinds a memo authorizing a freeze on hundreds of billions of dollars of federal grants and loans. Senators grill President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., at a heated confirmation hearing. And at least 30 people have been killed after a crush at the Kumbh Mela religious festival in northern India. Hello, I'm Caitríona Perry. Thanks for being with us. You're very welcome. Well, just one day after widespread public backlash, the White House says it's rescinding a memo that authorised a federal freeze on hundreds of billions of dollars in grants and loans. It comes after a judge temporarily halted the order after a lawsuit was filed. But the White House says this is not a rescinding of the federal funding freeze, just the memo itself, and that it's creating its own confusion. Well, as our North America correspondent Anthony Zerker explains, this is the latest situation.
The point that the press secretary was making there was that the executive orders that direct the federal government to review all of these programs and determine which ones do not comport with Donald Trump's agenda, which ones say advance gender ideology and other things, those orders still stay. And so the federal government and all of the agencies are still responsible for looking at programs and suspending the ones that don't fit. But that blanket ban, that blanket freeze on federal spending, that has now been lifted. Although, as you mentioned, the lawsuit is still proceeding. And actually, the lawyers from the states challenging that original memorandum and the freeze have pointed to the press secretary's comments and said, look, nothing has really changed. This lawsuit should keep going forward. And the judge seems to agree with them.
So as of today, Anthony, where do all of those various grants and aid programs stand?
Well, right now the freeze has been lifted. So the memorandum is gone. I think that people in the federal government still might be looking over their shoulders and wondering if specific programs that they think might contravene what Donald Trump wants, if those should go forward, and if not, when they should be frozen. But what the administration, the word the administration is going is that review has to be taking place, an ongoing review. And as soon as they find something, any kind of a program that goes against Donald Trump's outlined goals, then it should be frozen immediately. But there's still a very large gray area here, hence all the confusion still.
Well, President Donald Trump signed a memorandum instructing the Defense Department to prepare a facility at Guantanamo Bay to hold up to 30,000 migrants who are in the US illegally. The US detention facility in Cuba was set up in 2002 to detain terrorism suspects following the September 11th attacks. The BBC's North America editor Sarah Smith has more now from Washington.
Immigration rates have been visibly stepped up across America since Donald Trump's return to power. Soon there will be so many people in detention, there's not space to house them all. That's where Guantanamo Bay comes in. It was a notorious prison housing terrorist suspects with numerous allegations of abuse, even torture. Now it's in this base that President Trump says illegal immigrants arrested in America will be sent.
We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately, right? And that's a tough place to get out of.
Other detainees have already been deported on military planes back to Brazil and Colombia. Every aspect of American government is being radically reshaped by Mr. Trump's agenda, from freezing spending to appointing controversial cabinet members. Robert Kennedy Jr. brings a lot of controversial baggage with him into this hearing, including his vaccine scepticism. He was asked about his baseless claims that vaccines can cause autism or that there are no safe and effective vaccines. It is a medical condition in his throat that gives Mr. Kennedy this very distinctive voice.
We need to move on.
Senator, I support the measles vaccine. I support the polio vaccine. I will do nothing as HHS secretary that makes it difficult or discourages people from taking either of those
Anybody
vaccines.
who believes that ought to look at the measles book you wrote saying parents have been misled into believing that measles is a deadly disease. That's not true.
Reservations about Robert Kennedy Jr. go beyond just vaccines. Many Republicans are worried about his staunch support for abortion rights or his battle against food additives and ultra-processed food. His cousin, Caroline Kennedy, daughter of President John F. Kennedy, has gone public on why she believes he's not fit for office.
It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator. His basement, his garage, his dorm room were always the center of the action, where drugs were available, and he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed to his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence.
The BBC has approached Robert Kennedy for comment.
I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicine.
Before he joined Donald Trump, Bobby Kennedy was running to win the Democratic Party presidential nomination. He's not really on the left or the right of American politics, which means there are people who oppose his nomination right across the political spectrum. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Well, let's speak now to someone who knows Robert F. Kennedy Jr. very well. We're joined by Dennis Kucinich, who served as the campaign manager for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential campaign from May until October 2023. He also served as a Democratic congressman, but has since run for office as an independent. Dennis, thanks for being with us here on BBC News. When you heard all of the back and forward at that hearing today, and RFK Jr. being called an anti-vaxxer and so on, is that your view of him?
Well, it's not whether it's my view or not. I would not have backed his campaign from the beginning as a Democrat if he had told me that he was anti-vax and I asked him. So that he is for vaccine. He is not anti-vaccine. He's for vaccine safety. And why is that controversial? Why is wanting food safety controversial? Why is looking at food additives controversial? The point that Kennedy makes, which is critical, is that 90% of our healthcare spending goes to treat chronic diseases. You know, heart disease, stroke, cancer, respiratory disease, on, accounts for about 90% of $4.3 trillion a year in expenditures. This is what he's aimed at. And of course, you know, if you stand between the pharmaceutical companies and their profits just by asking questions about vaccine safety, you're not going to be their best friend. So, you know, he has made it very clear in the hearing today.
Many of those senators today quoted his own words back to them, though, and how he'd founded the Children's Health Defence Organisation, a non-profit that does tout anti-vaccine messages. And we've heard public health doctors say he's not up to the job. Why do you think he's most suited to this role above anybody else?
Well, you have to keep something in mind about Kennedy. He's been a plaintiff's attorney. You can't go into a courtroom and start pulling stuff out of thin air. He's science-based, he's fact-based, and nobody owns him. Now, you know, the questioning by the senators, it's all fair, except that they're not paying attention to concerns of the American people. That larger audience out there across America is concerned about how can they become healthier? How can we reduce the cost of healthcare? How can we make pharmaceuticals more available at lower price for people that need them? I mean, these are things that people care about. And while the senators have every right to ask him any question they want in this kind of a hearing, I think the American people are looking for a leader in healthcare who is on their side and who's ready to ask questions. And asking questions should never be controversial.
When you look at all these attacks on him, because there are many attacks saying that he isn't science-based, and again, quoting his own words back to him, books that he's written and so on, you see his own cousin, Caroline Kennedy, describing him as a predator. What do you make of those attacks? How do they square up with the man that you know?
Well, look, any of us who are from big families, we all have differences of opinion within the families, and some of them may be frankly stated, as Caroline Kennedy did. Where Robert F. Kennedy is right now, he's never pretended to be perfect. He has had a very difficult journey. He's carried more things on his back than most three people, you know, various kinds of addictions, a number of personal problems. But he's shown one thing, an ability to transcend that. And if someone has that ability, I think it invites thoughts of they might be more compassionate towards the American people and the suffering that they're going through, the journey that each individual has in the struggle towards health, whether it's physical or mental. So, here's an example of how someone, notwithstanding the flaws that he has, how he, upon reflecting on his own journey, may be well suited to help others conclude theirs in a very healthful way.
Why did you decide to leave his campaign and his team?
Well, we had some differences of opinion. It didn't have anything to do with healthcare, and I'm not going to get into it right now. But he is my friend. I'm in touch with him. We communicate often, and I wish him well. And I hope the Senate approves him, because I think at this point in time, his service to the country in looking at chronic diseases and their causes and how they can be managed and how people can move towards a more healthy existence. I think that's what's needed right now. So Kennedy should be approved, warts and all.
Do you think that he will?
I don't know. I mean, the Senate has to make up its mind. The Hegseth nomination was close. The vice president broke the tie in the Senate. I think it'll be close. But again, this is Robert F. Kennedy, and what he presents should not be controversial. He is offering his services to the country, and his knowledge that it's been hard gained because he has not had an easy life, but he's somebody who I think can relate to the struggles that a lot of people out there have, and they're looking for government to finally be on their side and not to judge people as Mr. Kennedy's being judged harshly by some people, even members of his family.
Okay, well, he's before the Health Committee in the Senate tomorrow, so there'll be a lot more grilling and back and forward there, no doubt. Dennis Kucinich, thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, earlier in the day, President Donald Trump signed the Laken-Riley Act into law. It's the first piece of legislation that he has signed since re-entering the White House just over a week ago. The law mandates the detention and deportation of undocumented people who are accused of theft and violent crimes, even before they're convicted. The measure passed a Republican-controlled Senate with some Democratic support, despite concerns from immigrant rights advocates. The law is named for Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student who went out for a run in Georgia in 2024 and was killed by a Venezuelan national who is in the US illegally. Laken's family joined President Trump at the ceremony, where he blamed past immigration policy for her death.
He trespassed across our southern border in 2022 and was apprehended by Border Patrol, but under the cruel policies of the last administration, instead of being deported as he should have been, he was released into the United States.
Meanwhile, President Trump's immigration crackdown is continuing at pace with more raids by ICE. Here we can show you the figures published by the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE. Going along the bottom row there, you can see the days of the week, and running vertically the number of arrests day by day. And you can see there that Sunday hit a high of 1,179 arrests in one day. Well, to wrap up what's been another busy day in Washington, D.C., I've been speaking to Chris Sununu. He's a Republican, the former governor of New Hampshire. He is a supporter of President Trump, and I asked him what he makes of the president's efforts to roll back federal grants, aid and other welfare programs.
So what they want to do is review it all. There's massive waste in the federal government. And they give the states a lot of money, to be sure, but there's massive waste there. So I love the fact that they're willing to dig in and figure out where the waste is and where the value is. The memo that came out yesterday that everyone's talking about, frankly, I think it was just too general, too poorly written, and created a lot of confusion. And that happens, unfortunately. They've since rescinded that memo, and they've kind of pulled back on that. They say they're still going to review all those options, but they were stopped by a court. I believe they pulled back because they didn't want the court to negate their reviews. The court negated their ability to stop funding, but they didn't want the court to go so far to say, oh, and by the way, you can't look under the hood, right? You can't do the audits. We want the audits. We want to be able to do that, and I think that's where it's going. So we have tens of trillions, over 30 trillion in debt here in this country, well over 30 trillion, approaching 40 soon enough. That's real money that the government doesn't owe. I owe as a taxpayer. Bill Smith walking down the street, he owes that money. So somewhere, somehow, this country is going to have to find ways to find efficiency, make cuts, change some systems, and they're taking the first steps at that. But that has to happen. That's not politics, that's math. And we owe this money. We've just borrowed way beyond our means, and it's a first step of getting things under control.
Now, just to ask you about something else, because President Trump has continued this dizzying pace of action since he took office a week and a half ago or so. We saw more immigration measures today. Obviously, he signed the Laken Riley Act into law, but he also announced that Guantanamo Bay he wants to see used to house up to 30,000 deported migrants, something the Cuban government has already come out to rail against. What's your view of moving migrants to Guantanamo Bay into detention camps?
Well, look, I think there's a couple pieces there. Number one, I think what he's really saying is we're not pulling punches. We're going to pull out every stop we can to make sure that not just migrants, but the criminals, that's what he's going after. Not just illegals, but illegals that have committed crimes. They're the top priority. There's well over 1 million of them here. We're going to deport them and send them back to their own countries. And what we saw with Colombia just a few days ago was Colombia saying, oh, we're not going to take our own citizens back. We're not going to take our own criminals back. Now, they quickly capitulated. But what Trump is saying is, in those cases where we may have a country here or there or everywhere that for some reason we can't get them deported, we at least got a place to put them off our own mainland. We're going to get them out of our cities and out of our streets and make sure that our communities are safer. And if the last measure of resort is to put them at Guantanamo Bay, so be it. And at the end of the day, most Americans will be like, yeah, okay, just get them off our streets. These are criminals. These are people that are committing crimes every single day. So for the most part, that it really is supported here in the United States. And if this has to be a backstop to make sure our streets are safer, then so be it.
Chris Sununu talking to me there a little earlier. Of course, until just a few weeks ago, he was the 4-term governor of New Hampshire. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Now on BBC News, Hardtalk asks tough questions in interviews with people who are shaping the news. Welcome to Hardtalk. I'm Sarah Montague. A fragile ceasefire is still in place in Gaza. Assuming it holds, the next step should be talking about the future and how to make it permanent. My guest today, Bassem Naim, is a senior political figure in Hamas. It carried out the October the 7th attacks, in which around 1,200 people were killed and 251 taken hostage. That led to the Israeli onslaught on Gaza, which has flattened much of the territory and killed over 47,000 Palestinians, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Prescribed as a terrorist organisation by the West and running out of allies in the Middle East, is Hamas ready to negotiate its own demise? Bassem Naim, welcome to Hardtalk.
You are welcome.
You've been involved since the beginning of the ceasefire talks. How confident are you that they will now lead to a permanent ceasefire?
This is our hopes, and we are committed to the ceasefire deal, and we will do our maximum to give this deal a chance to succeed, because from day one, after the aggression on our people after October 7th, our main goal was how to stop this aggression, how to end this slaughter on our people. Therefore, we are ready to facilitate and to overcome any obstacles or challenges which might be faced during the implementation. But at the same time, we are expecting that Netanyahu and his government, as usual, they might use any excuses to penetrate or to violate or to sabotage this deal. But hopefully this deal will lead to, in the second phase at least, to a permanent ceasefire and total withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the areas occupied during the after October 7th.
Okay, well, as I understand it, the negotiations are meant to begin no later than day 16, which we're rapidly approaching, and that's about establishing a permanent ceasefire. Have there been communications on whether and how that will happen?
According to the deal, we have to start the negotiations on day 16 after signing the agreement, but our leadership is today in Cairo, and they have met with the Egyptians, with the Egyptian leadership, and I think part of the talks were today how to launch the second round of the negotiations, because we know that it will be very difficult, very complicated negotiations, especially we are talking about negotiations for the rest of the first phase about the conditions of the second phase, which have to lead to a permanent ceasefire and total withdrawal, plus a final prisoner exchange.
Hamas, of course, has new leadership. Many of the senior military figures were killed. Is Hamas now prepared to change its approach to try to pursue a peaceful resolution to this?
I think this is a hypothetical question, because Palestinians have for 30 years have tried through the illusionary process, the so-called peace process after Oslo Agreement, to achieve a political peaceful solution or settlement for this conflict. Unfortunately, the other party has used this time for 30 years to implement its hidden agenda by annexing more land, by building more checkpoints, by suffocating the Palestinians everywhere in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Gaza is separated, totally isolated, Jewidization of Jerusalem, total control of the West Bank.
Right.
This is the result of 30 years of peaceful approach. But I have to say, after 30 years, the Israelis have declared publicly in front of the UN General Assembly that they are not ready for any chance to give the Palestinians any chance to have an independent self-sovereign state. Therefore, this question has to be directed to the other party.
Okay, so and the Israelis would take a very different position, of course, on calling Hamas peaceful, as you say. Before we get into some of the challenges, I want to ask you how you envisage the future governance of Gaza. You said at the weekend, we are not eager to be part of any government, and we are ready to hand it over to any Palestinian body supported by all Palestinian factions. So will Hamas cede control in Gaza?
I think this position of Hamas is not only during the last few weeks. We have declared this position now for more than 10 years. We have handed over the government in the Gaza Strip in 2014 for a unity government, but unfortunately it has failed. And we have repeated the same thing in 2017. Therefore, this is our firm position that we are not eager to be part of any government controlling neither the Gaza Strip nor the West Bank. We consider ourselves a resistance movement. Therefore, we have negotiated with our Palestinian factions, with our Palestinian colleagues, how to achieve a Palestinian unity government formed of technocrats. These people, for a limited time, have well-defined tasks to prepare for election, to rebuild the Gaza Strip, and to reunify the ministries. Unfortunately, this has failed by the rejection or the blockade of Mr. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the PA, and also by intervention from the outside. We are adopting the same position. We are not eager to be part of any government in the Gaza, neither in the Gaza Strip nor in the West Bank. But we want to be sure that we have a government or a body ruling the Palestinian territories, which is representing all Palestinians without any exceptions, and also to be honest and not corrupt.
But there is already a Palestinian Authority technocratic government that is made up of individuals who are not affiliated to any party, and they say they are ready to go into Gaza immediately. They've made plans. Will you cede control to the Palestinian Authority?
I think no one can claim that this is a Palestinian unity government or a government which is representing all Palestinians, because we met in Moscow, we met in Beijing twice, and all factions, including Fatah movement, we have signed a document, a unity or reconciliation agreement, how to form the government, that all factions together have to sit together and to discuss how to build this government, which tasks this government have, and which people who can be part of this government. Unfortunately, this has been found by only one man, who is Mahmoud Abbas. Therefore, this government is not representing all Palestinians, is not a unity government, and they are not technocrat. Most of them are representing Fatah movement.
Except it is a technocratic government at the moment, but you are saying, look, we need to be involved in negotiations. We have been involved, and you're having a hold over them taking over. But how can Hamas be involved in any talks about the future when you were behind the slaughter of October the 7th? Do you still defend it?
Look, Hamas is not a military group. Hamas is representing a vast majority of Palestinians everywhere in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and in the diaspora. Hamas was elected in 2006 by a vast majority of Palestinians, but unfortunately, under the pressure from outside, this government were isolated, blocked, and sanctioned. Therefore, we have our political input. We can say what is representing us as part of this people, but again, we should not be part of this government. And when
I want to ask you about October the 7th. You have defended what happened on October the 7th. You say Hamas is not military. It was clearly military that day. Would you do it again now that you know the consequences of it?
Look, Palestinian people are people under occupation, and I think it is genuine and well inherited in the international law that Palestinians under occupation have all the right to get rid of the occupation and to defend themselves by all means, including armed resistance. Therefore, the founding question, the main question is not about the resistance, because the resistance is an act of defense, is a response. But the main question is, according to international law, how to get rid of the occupation. Why not to call the Israelis to be committed to their obligations under international law and to withdraw from all the occupied Palestinian territories. And today this
Dr.
round of confrontation is led by Hamas,
what I was asking
but 20 years ago it was led by Fatah or others.
Dr. Naim, I asked you about October the 7th, which you have justified in the time since then. And I asked you, would you do it again now you know the consequences?
Look, resistance is a comprehensive approach. It could be political, it could be diplomatic, it could be by BDS, it could be in the media, and it could be militarily. What can we do in the future to defend our people, to try to get rid of the occupation? This has to be discussed and consulted in the movement, in Hamas, and with other factions and with other Palestinians who might have other approaches. The main goal is how to get rid of the occupation.
And
if this is the only way to get rid of the occupation, I'm sure we will continue resisting the occupation.
We will come back to that. But what I'm wanting you to focus on, because you have never answered the question of the day itself. Immediately afterwards, you said, no one can confirm our soldiers, our fighters have killed civilians. Since then, you've admitted there were mistakes. But Alice Edwards, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, told us on Hardtalk only recently there were some of the most egregious forms of torture you can imagine. Cutting people's heads off is a form of torture. Hamas committed widespread torture on the day. Are you saying she's wrong?
First of all, we didn't admitted widespread torture, as you said, and a lot of the stories were distributed in the Western mainstream media has been proven later to be fabricated, like beheading of babies and raping of women, and this has been also proven by the international community, UN organization and UN human rights bodies. But it is not about October 7th, because before October 7th there is October 6th, where Palestinians in Gaza Strip were suffocated for 17 years as a under a hard siege. 20,000 Palestinians were killed. 20,000 Palestinians were killed between 2000 and 2023. Therefore, October 7th is an act of defense, is a response to a suffocating siege, to an oppression and aggression and occupation for 76 years.
Dr. Naim, I'm asking you though, because Hamas is responsible for what happened on that day, and you are currently involved in negotiations.
No, Hamas is not responsible for that.
Who is responsible?
Israel is responsible, because if you are suffocating me, I am defending myself, I am reacting to your aggression and killing and massacres.
Dr.
I am
Naim,
not responsible. You have pushed me to resort to these tools.
That day was not about defense. The UN Commission of Inquiry found that among the dead were 40 children.
International law is the reference for all our talks now. According to international law, people under occupation, like the Palestinians, have the right
so it was
to use
acceptable to kill children
in order to defend themselves.
It was acceptable to take a
9
9-month-old to take babies hostage.
No, it is not acceptable. But look, at that time, I think a lot of Israeli media and a lot of Israeli investigation have said it clearly that most of what happened also happened by Israeli hands, by bombardments of through tanks and aircrafts. A lot of what happened through chaos has happened when the borders were fallen apart. Again, we are people under occupation. 1 million Palestinians were in Israeli prison. No one is talking about them for decades.
So
all the media, international mainstream media, are keeping silent towards our suffering, our people under occupation. Yesterday we have witnessed someone who were released.
You keep saying, Dr. Naim, that the Israelis are to blame. The prominent Islamic scholar in Gaza, Professor Dr. Salman al-Daya, who is a former dean of the Faculty of Sharia and Law at the Hamas-affiliated Islamic University, issued a fatwa condemning the attacks, criticising Hamas for what he called violating Islamic principles governing jihad. And he said Hamas had failed in its obligations of keeping fighters away from the homes of defenceless Palestinian civilians. Is he wrong?
I am not aware about your conversation with this academic, and I don't know in which context he have said it. But again, I can accept that someone here or there in the Palestinian territories, in Palestinian factions, might criticize any behavior of Hamas, not only on October 7th, after and before October 7th, because we are people, we might have different opinions toward the same problem. But again, it is about the main track of this conflict. We are people under occupation. Israel has suffocated the people and oppressed our people for 75 years, and we have the right to defend our people by all means, including armed resistance.
Except we're talking about the consequences of that day. And one of the consequences, of course, was the Israeli reaction, which hit the Palestinian people, 47,000 killed, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, much of Gaza flattened. And we now have the US president asking Jordan and Egypt to take in Gazans. He said, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing. It could be temporary. It could be long term. Now, you previously actually praised President Trump because you said you couldn't imagine the ceasefire without his involvement. What do you say to that suggestion from him?
I feel as if you are accusing me to be responsible for the genocide committed by Netanyahu and his fascist government. This was not a conventional war between two parties. It was a genocide from one party against the other party. One party has smashed the so-called international humanitarian law and killed people without any limitations, without any respect to so-called international humanitarian law. Unfortunately, it was covered and supported by the Western countries and by the Western media for a long time. Again, we stand, Bezalel Smotrich have said it clearly. Palestinians have one of three choices: either to leave the country, or to be killed, or to live as slaves under the occupation. We have decided, if we have only one of two choices, to die by starvation or to die by an Israeli rocket, we have decided to stand up to defend our dignity and freedom and to die by an Israeli rocket. But you cannot blame us if someone dropped a nuclear bomb against our people and committed a genocide. You have to bring him to accountability in front of the ICC and ICG.
Genocide, just to be clear, the International Court of Justice will be making a judgment at some point on that. But we'll put that aside. I want to return to, given all the challenges that the region now faces, how you think things should play out. Because you say there have been talks between Hamas and Fatah to try to get Palestinian unity, this technocratic government. How far advanced were they? Have you come up with names for this government?
We have discussed with other factions, including Fatah, how to form a Palestinian unity government. Unfortunately, it has been rejected and undermined by Mahmoud Abbas and his government in Ramallah. Then we have received an Egyptian proposal to form an independent technocratic body or a committee to run Gaza Strip in all aspects, and that Hamas have to hand it over to this committee, supported by all factions, and it has been accepted by all factions. And by the way, through the talks to the Egyptians, we are aware that they have talked to other Arabic countries, to the Arabic and Islamic Summit, to the Americans, to some Western European countries, and all of them are supporting this proposal. And we have said, yes, welcome, we are accepting this proposal that technocratic people from Gaza who are taking over and running the whole Gaza Strip. But unfortunately, again, this proposal has been rejected from Mahmoud Abbas. Therefore, we are still today negotiating, our leadership today negotiating with the Egyptian leadership how to proceed forward until we reach this point to have a body or a committee or a government to run the Gaza Strip. We will take our responsibility to continue managing the situation on the Gaza Strip. We are not ready to leave it for chaos or for.
So just to be clear,
yes?
Are you saying that the international community, including the US, is on board with this Egyptian proposal of the technocratic government?
This is what we have heard from the Egyptians, that there were consultations with some European countries, with in the Islamic Arabic Summit, and with the Americans, and they took positive positions toward this idea. But again, it was unfortunately spoiled by the rejection of Mr. Mahmoud Abbas.
So can you do any sort of deal? You saying there cannot be some form of peace in Gaza with President Mahmoud Abbas in place?
It should not be connected to any person, because Palestinian people are struggling for their freedom and dignity and independence now for more than 100 years. It is bigger and more important than anyone, including any movement. And therefore, we have to continue fighting and struggling for the dignity and independence of our people, with Mahmoud Abbas and or without him. But if it is possible to do with our colleagues in Fatah, this is the preferable choice for us.
So if Hamas is to survive in any form, do you accept, and if a two-state solution was on offer, would Hamas renounce violence and publicly recognise Israel's right to exist, just as the PLO did in 1993?
We have said it repeatedly, our leadership repeatedly said it many times. If we have our own state, our independent state, Hamas is ready to convert itself into a political party, and our military wing will be part of the Palestinian national army. But this is when we achieve our freedom and independence, self-sovereignty. Before that, we have always the right to defend our people, to fight against or to struggle against the occupation by all means, including armed resistance.
So given that, that picture that you paint there, does that mean you could live alongside Israel?
Look, again, Sarah, you are asking a very, very hypothetical question. Is the other party is talking clearly. You are asking the victims who are oppressed and suffocated to recognize the aggressor and the jailer. The jailer is talking clearly in front of the UN. There is no space, there is no place in between the river and the sea for any political entity except Israel. And he shredded the UN Charter and the UN maps. Second, PLO, which is the legitimate representative of the Palestinians, have recognized Israel. What is the result after 30 years? Nothing. A disaster. More land is annexed, more Judaization of Jerusalem, total control of Al-Aqsa, Gaza is destroyed and separated. Therefore, this question has to be directed to the other party who have conquered everything, the land, the holy places, the people, and everything, and you are asking the victims to recognize the jailer. Yes, when we have, look, in the international law, can you tell me, is there any condition for any people to have their own state? Is there any condition previously to recognize any country around the world, not only Israel, any country? This is a genuine right of Palestinians to have their independent own state, regardless of recognition of any country, not only Israel.
Bassem Naim, thank you for coming on Hard Talk.
Please, you are welcome.
Live from New York, this is BBC News. The White House rescinds a memo authorizing a freeze on hundreds of billions of dollars of federal grants and loans. Senators grill President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., at a heated confirmation hearing. And at least 30 people have been killed after a crush at the Kumbh Mela religious festival in northern India. Hello, I'm Caitríona Perry. You're very welcome. Just one day after widespread public backlash, the White House says it's rescinding a memo that authorized a federal freeze on hundreds of billions of dollars in grants and loans. It comes after a judge temporarily halted the order after a lawsuit was filed. But the White House says this is not a rescinding of the federal funding freeze, just the memo itself. And that is creating some confusion. Our North America correspondent Anthony Zerker explains.
The point that the press secretary was making there was that the executive orders that direct the federal government to review all of these programs and determine which ones do not comport with Donald Trump's agenda, which ones say advance gender ideology and other things, those orders still stay. And so the federal government and all of the agencies are still responsible for looking at programs and suspending the ones that don't fit. But that blanket ban, that blanket freeze on federal spending, that has now been lifted. Although, as you mentioned, the lawsuit is still proceeding. And actually, the lawyers from the states challenging that original memorandum and the freeze have pointed to the press secretary's comments and said, look, nothing has really changed. This lawsuit should keep going forward. And the judge seems to agree with them.
So as of today, Anthony, where do all of those various grants and aid programs stand?
Well, right now the freeze has been lifted. So the memorandum is gone. I think that people in the federal government still might be looking over their shoulders and wondering if specific programs that they think might contravene what Donald Trump wants, if those should go forward, and if not, when they should be frozen. But what the administration, the word the administration is going is saying is that review has to be taking place, an ongoing review. And as soon as they find something, any kind of a program that goes against Donald Trump's outlined goals, then it should be frozen immediately. But there's still a very large gray area here, hence all the confusion still.
Well, President Donald Trump has signed a memorandum instructing the Defense Department to prepare a facility at Guantanamo Bay to hold up to 30,000 migrants who are in the U.S. illegally. The U.S. detention facility in Cuba was set up in 2002 to detain terrorism suspects following the September 11th attacks. The BBC's North America editor Sarah Smith has more from Washington.
Immigration rates have been visibly stepped up across America since Donald Trump's return to power. Soon there will be so many people in detention, there's not space to house them all. That's where Guantanamo Bay comes in. It was a notorious prison housing terrorist suspects with numerous allegations of abuse, even torture. Now it's in this base that President Trump says illegal immigrants arrested in America will be sent.
We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately, right? And that's a tough place to get out of.
Other detainees have already been deported on military planes back to Brazil and Colombia. Every aspect of American government is being radically reshaped by Mr. Trump's agenda, from freezing spending to appointing controversial cabinet members. Robert Kennedy Jr. brings a lot of controversial baggage with him into this hearing, including his vaccine scepticism. He was asked about his baseless claims that vaccines can cause autism or that there are no safe and effective vaccines. It is a medical condition in his throat that gives Mr. Kennedy this very distinctive voice.
We need to move on. I support the measles vaccine. I support the polio vaccine. I will do nothing as HHS secretary that makes it difficult or discourages people from taking either of those
Anybody
vaccines.
who believes that ought to look at the measles book you wrote saying parents have been misled into believing that measles is a deadly disease. That's not true.
Reservations about Robert Kennedy Jr. go beyond just vaccines. Many Republicans are worried about his staunch support for abortion rights or his battle against food additives and ultra-processed food. His cousin, Caroline Kennedy, daughter of President John F. Kennedy, has gone public on why she believes he's not fit for office.
It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator. His basement, his garage, his dorm room were always the center of the action, where drugs were available, and he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed to his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence.
The BBC has approached Robert Kennedy for comment.
I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicine.
Before he joined Donald Trump, Bobby Kennedy was running to win the Democratic Party presidential nomination. He's not really on the left or the right of American politics, which means there are people who oppose his nomination right across the political spectrum. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Well, I've been speaking to Dennis Kucinich, who served as campaign manager for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential campaign from May to October 2023. He also served as a Democratic congressman, but has since run for office as an independent himself.
It's not whether it's my view or not. I would not have backed his campaign from the beginning as a Democrat if he had told me that he was anti-vax, and I asked him. So that he is for vaccine. He is not anti-vaccine. He's for vaccine safety. And why is that controversial? Why is wanting food safety controversial? Why is looking at food additives controversial? The point that Kennedy makes, which is critical, is that 90% of our healthcare spending goes to treat chronic diseases. You know, heart disease, stroke, cancer, respiratory disease, on, accounts for about 90% of $4.3 trillion a year in expenditures. This is what he's aimed at. And of course, you know, if you stand between the pharmaceutical companies and their profits just by asking questions about vaccine safety, you're not going to be their best friend. So, he has made it very clear in the hearing today.
Many of those senators today quoted his own words back to them, though, and how he'd founded the Children's Health Defence Organisation, a non-profit that does tout anti-vaccine messages. And we've heard public health doctors say he's not up to the job. Why do you think he's most suited to this role above anybody else?
Well, you have to keep something in mind about Kennedy. He's been a plaintiff's attorney. You can't go into a courtroom and start pulling stuff out of thin air. He's science-based, he's fact-based, and nobody owns him. Now, the questioning by the senators, it's all fair, except that they're not paying attention to concerns of the American people. That larger audience out there across America is concerned about how can they become healthier? How can we reduce the cost of healthcare? How can we make pharmaceuticals more available at lower price for people that need them? I mean, these are things that people care about. And while the senators have every right to ask him any question they want in this kind of a hearing, I think the American people are looking for a leader in healthcare who is on their side and who's ready to ask questions. And asking questions should never be controversial.
When you look at all these attacks on him, because there are many attacks saying that he isn't science-based, and again, quoting his own words back to him, books that he's written and so on, you see his own cousin, Caroline Kennedy, describing him as a predator. What do you make of those attacks? How do they square up with the man that you know?
Well, look, any of us who are from big families, we all have differences of opinion within the families, and some of them may be frankly stated, as Caroline Kennedy did. Where Robert F. Kennedy is right now, he's never pretended to be perfect. He has had a very difficult journey. He's carried more things on his back than most three people, various kinds of addictions, a number of personal problems. But he's shown one thing, an ability to transcend that. And if someone has that ability, I think it invites thoughts of they might be more compassionate towards the American people and the suffering that they're going through, the journey that each individual has in the struggle towards health, whether it's physical or mental. So, here's an example of how someone, notwithstanding the flaws that he has, how he, upon reflecting on his own journey, may be well suited to help others conclude theirs in a very healthful way.
Why did you decide to leave his campaign and his team?
Well, we had some differences of opinion. It didn't have anything to do with healthcare, and I'm not going to get into it right now. But he is my friend. I'm in touch with him. We communicate often, and I wish him well. And I hope the Senate approves him, because I think at this point in time, his service to the country in looking at chronic diseases and their causes and how they can be managed and how people can move towards a more healthy existence, I think that's what's needed right now. So Kennedy should be approved, warts and all.
Do you think that he will?
I don't know. I mean, the Senate has to make up its mind. The Hegseth nomination was close. The vice president broke the tie in the Senate. I think it'll be close. But again, this is Robert F. Kennedy, and what he presents should not be controversial. He is offering his services to the country, and his knowledge that it's been hard gained because he has not had an easy life, but he's somebody who I think can relate to the struggles that a lot of people out there have, and they're looking for government to finally be on their side and not to judge people as Mr. Kennedy's being judged harshly by some people, even members of his family.
Well, earlier in the day, President Trump signed the Laken Riley Act into law. It's the first piece of legislation he's signed since re-entering the White House just over a week ago. Now, this law mandates the detention and deportation of undocumented people who are accused of theft and violent crimes before they are even convicted. The measure passed a Republican-controlled Senate with some Democratic support, despite concerns from immigrant rights advocates. The law is named for Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student who went out for a run in Georgia in 2024 and was killed by a Venezuelan national who was in the US illegally. Laken Riley's family joined President Trump at the ceremony, where he blamed past immigration policy for her death.
He trespassed across our southern border in 2022 and was apprehended by Border Patrol, but under the cruel policies of the last administration, instead of being deported, as he should have been, he was released into the United States.
Meanwhile, President Trump's immigration crackdown is continuing at pace with more ICE raids. Here we can show you the figures published by the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE. And going along the bottom row there, you can see the days of the week, and then running vertically the number of arrests day by day. And you can see there that on Sunday, those arrests hit a high, 1,179 arrests in one day. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're watching BBC News. 3 more Israeli hostages are set to be released on Thursday in exchange for more than 100 Palestinian prisoners. That's according to local advocacy groups. It comes as Israel's defense minister said his country's troops will remain in the Jenin refugee camp even after their raid in the occupied West Bank is finished. Israel's military is in the 8th day of security operations there and accompanied by helicopters, drones and armoured vehicles. The bombardment in the area has forced residents to flee from Jenin. Our correspondent, Weir Davis, has the latest now on Thursday's scheduled hostage exchange. He's in Jerusalem.
Well, as this fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas still holds, we've just got the figures and the names of the latest group of hostages who will be released. There are 3 of them. 2 of them are thought to be the last remaining female hostages still alive. They are Arbel Yehud, a 29-year-old who was abducted from a kibbutz near the Gaza border on the 7th of October, and Agam Berger, a 20-year-old military observer, also taken from the military base near the Gaza border. They're due to be released along with an 80-year-old man, Gadi Moses. Now, the Hamas have also unexpectedly said they're going to release 5 Thai nationals. They were among a group of Thai agricultural workers, several of them who were abducted from the kibbutzim where they worked on the day of that Hamas attack, when thousands of armed Hamas gunmen streamed across the border, killing around 1,200 people and abducting several hundred back into Gaza. We don't know the names of the Thai nationals yet, and they're not formally tied to this deal. As part of the deal, now about 110 Palestinian prisoners will also be released from Israeli jails. They're said to include about 30 women and children. Now, while they will be released back to their homes and home areas in occupied East Jerusalem and the occupied Palestinian West Bank, according to Israeli media reports, several of those who've been sentenced to life imprisonment for much more serious offences won't be allowed to return to those areas. They will be exiled either to Egypt or neighbouring Arab countries. Now, this is the latest group of hostages and prisoners to be swapped. It's a fragile ceasefire. There are concerns, of course, that it won't last beyond the initial 6 weeks. Those talks to try and extend the ceasefire will continue, will restart next week. But of course, if the ceasefire itself collapses, it means there will be several hostages still held in captivity in Gaza, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners who might have been expected to be released still held in Israeli jails, and that humanitarian crisis, which is being ameliorated, which is being addressed now in Gaza, that could also worsen. So good news all round that the hostages are being released tomorrow, more prisoners being released, but there are concerns that the ceasefire itself might not last beyond the initial 6 weeks.
As Israel prepares to ban the main UN agency for Palestinian refugees starting on Thursday, there are fresh warnings that it could undermine critical aid delivery in Gaza. Earlier today, Hamas said that a delay in aid may affect the further release of hostages. Israeli officials have not spelled out how new legislation will be enforced there and in the occupied West Bank. The UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, supports some 6 million Palestinians across the Middle East. Already, Israel has ordered it to close its schools and its clinics, serving tens of thousands of people in Israeli-annexed East Jerusalem. Our Middle East correspondent Yolanda Nell reports.
Homeless and displaced. But most Gazans were classed as refugees even before this war. Many are the children and grandchildren of Palestinians who fled their homes in fighting when Israel was created in 1948. For 7 decades, one UN agency, UNRWA, has been a critical lifeline. But new Israeli laws threaten its work.
It would be a catastrophe. If this ban comes into place, what it will mean is that it will deepen and further the suffering of the Palestinian people.
UNRWA has given shelter to the Nasir family for the past 15 months. If it closes, they fear losing vital aid and worry their children won't restart their education. If you compare now with before the war, Ahmed says, they already completely forgot there's something called school. Israel has long criticized UNRWA, saying it teaches Palestinians to dream of returning to their historic homes. But tensions have risen since the 7th of October attacks. A UN investigation found that 9 UNRWA workers may have joined the deadly assault. They were fired. Israel insists problems remain.
I think the law is pretty clear. So on Thursday, Israel is gonna disconnect all of our communications with the organization of UNRWA. It will have to evacuate its facilities, for example, in Jerusalem.
That's created nervousness in Shuafat, in Israeli-annexed East Jerusalem. Refugee camps like this one, UNRWA itself, were never supposed to be permanent. What happens to refugees was meant to be worked out in peace talks, but they stalled long ago. And now Palestinians feel Israel is using this opportunity to push its own solution. Retired local doctor Salim Anati tells me people here reject the change.
If Israel wants to end UNRWA, they must end also the occupation and give us our rights.
There are uncertainties over how Israel's ban will work. But UN officials say it will hit just as a fragile ceasefire is taking hold in Gaza and warn it could jeopardize long-term chances of peace. Yolanda Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
At least 30 people have been killed and 90 injured in a crush at the Kumbh Mela festival in northern India. Witnesses describe chaotic scenes as people tried to escape the crush with belongings scattered on the ground. The Kumbh Mela is one of the world's biggest religious festivals, and up to 100 million people are there today to take part in a bathing ritual in the Ganges. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has offered his condolences. Our South Asia correspondent Samir Hussain reports now from Prayagraj, where the holy festival is taking place.
Grieving and exhausted, Jagwanti stands outside the hospital looking for her family. My mother died. Her mother died, she cries. I could never have imagined that something like this could happen. Otherwise, we would have never come here to die. We thought the government would provide us with facilities. We didn't know we would be stuck behind so many barricades, unable to move freely and left to die. She, like others, are here to identify bodies of loved ones. Before the day even started, tension was already building. Police breaking their own barriers, sprinting to disperse the crowds. Faith drove them here by the millions, wanting to bathe in the holy waters. Instead, many were whisked away.
injured or worse.
Now, what witnesses have told us is that there were just hundreds and hundreds of people sleeping here on the riverbanks. Now, just over this way is the main bathing area where everyone wants to take a dip in the holy waters. And there was such a crush of people that they came over this way, and as ever, in this kind of a crowd, one person gets pushed, and it ended up that people got trampled on.
The state minister has called for an investigation. What exactly happened and possible lapses by police. A festival to celebrate faith has left many grieving instead. Samir Hussain, BBC News, Prayagraj.
There are reports that Rwandan-backed M23 rebels have seized more territory in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo after capturing the key city of Goma. In an address to the nation, the Congolese president, Felix Tshisekedi, vowed to launch a fierce counterattack against what he called terrorists and to restore government authority in the east. He said the international community wasn't doing enough to stop the rebels' advance. The DRC government accuses Rwanda of aiding M23, which Rwanda's government has repeatedly denied. M23 fighters want control of Goma as it's a vital trading and transport hub within reach of mining towns that supply metals and minerals such as gold, tin and coltan. I spoke to Lewis Smudge, who is the Central Africa Director at the Human Rights Watch, for more on the situation in the DR Congo.
Yeah, I mean, Goma is Congo's third largest city. It has between 1 and 2 million people, and it has 650,000 internally displaced since last weekend. And electricity's been cut off. Telephone networks have been cut off. There's no running water. The M23 and the Rwandan forces effectively encircled the city before they went inside. And so now, predictably, we're seeing a steep rise in the cost of food. We've been on the phone all day with people in Goma who are talking about having to walk 10 to 12 kilometers each way to cross the border into Rwanda to buy food at higher prices with which to go back to their homes. So this isn't tenable. That's not even talking about the medical crisis. Food stocks and medical stocks around the city have been sacked and looted, and NGOs can't circulate. So it's really a city on edge. It's a major strategic city, and there has to be some recourse immediately to enable people to get on with their daily lives.
I'm Caitríona Perry. Thanks for watching. Stay here on BBC News.
Live from Singapore, now on BBC News, Business Today.
US President Trump lashes out at the Federal Reserve after it kept interest rates steady in the central bank's first policy decision of the year. Hefty discounts for its electric vehicles don't seem to be helping Tesla, as it reports weaker sales for the fourth quarter. Hello and welcome to Business Today. I'm Katie Silver. We begin with the Fed's first policy decision of the year, where it left interest rates unchanged on Wednesday. This was also the US Central Bank's first policy decision with Donald Trump in the White House. Our North America business correspondent Ritika Gupta has all the details from New York.
The Fed held interest rates steady as it pauses to assess the inflation outlook. As widely expected, policymakers voted unanimously to keep the federal funds rate in a range of 4.25 to 4.5% after cutting interest rates at 3 consecutive meetings. But while Chair Jerome Powell said he sees the economy still growing at a solid pace, the Fed statement removed reference to inflation progress towards the 2% goal and noted inflation remains somewhat elevated, sending stocks on Wall Street lower on Wednesday. This was the first Fed decision under a new Donald Trump presidency, who has openly said that he wants to see lower rates. When asked if the president has demanded interest rates drop immediately, Powell remained tight-lipped.
I'm not going to have any response or comment whatsoever on what the president said. It's not appropriate for me to do so.
The sidestep on complex issues related to both monetary policy and the new political landscape was anticipated as the central bank awaits to see the impacts of Trump's policies, especially if threats to hit foreign goods with import taxes or tariffs could send inflation rising again. And just ahead of its decision, inflation fears were stoked further by comments by Howard Lutnick, Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary, as he faced a hearing in the Senate. He said he wants across-the-board tariffs, but he denied that tariffs will cause inflation.
The economy of the United States of America will be much, much better. A particular product's price may go up, but all of them, this is not inflationary. The two top countries with tariffs, India and China, to have the most tariffs and no inflation. It is just a nonsense that tariffs cause inflation.
While questions remain on inflation and the future path of interest rates, it seems investors will need to wait until the Fed's March meeting, when officials will update publicly their forecasts for the economy.
Ritika Gupta reporting there. Now, US President Donald Trump reacted to the Fed's decision in a social media post. He accused the central bank and Chairman Jerome Powell of mishandling the economy, saying they had failed to stop the problem when they created with inflation. For more on the road ahead for the US economy, let's bring in Sarah Malik, Chief Investment Officer at Nuveen Equities. Thank you for joining me, Sarah. Were you surprised that there was no further rate cuts from the Fed? I guess often you may well indeed do 3 cuts in a row and then pause to see if they're having the effect you want.
Well, the Fed's message to the markets today was that they are not in a hurry to cut rates. I think today's pause was not a surprise to the markets, but for those hoping for a rate cut in March, I wouldn't hold my breath. Now, there's 2 reasons here why the Fed is being cautious. Number one is inflation in the U.S., which remains sticky, driven by services and wages, and also employment markets that remain quite healthy. And given inflation, employment markets, and a strong U.S. economy, the Fed is not in a hurry to cut rates. However, we still do see 2 rate cuts in 2025, but it'll be a back-end loaded year for rate cuts.
Interesting. You mentioned some of those sort of structural factors going on. How do you think the Fed is weighing up Trump's proposed policies in its calculations regarding inflation? For example, if they do indeed freeze federal grant funds, that's of course going to have a bit of a contractionary impact, but then there's those tax cuts and tariffs as well.
Well, definitely tax cuts and deregulation are pro-growth policy. So that may exacerbate that issue with the U.S. economy being strong, which is a good thing, but it's for the economy, but a bad thing for the Fed when it comes to cutting interest rates. I think the wild card here is tariffs. And what is the impact of tariffs? Adding in tariffs around the world could be inflationary as we produce more goods back in the U.S. And again, that could make the Fed's problem a little bit harder, because as long as inflation remains sticky, and we think inflation is going to be around and higher for longer, that's going to make it challenging for the Fed to put in a significant rate of decreases in the interest rate.
Now, of course, we did at one point see President Trump saying that when he was going to come to office, he was going to fire Jerome Powell. It does seem the two are struggling to get on. Trump, of course, seems to be interfering in every element of politics, talking about interfering in rates. Can he influence rate decisions from the Fed?
I think at this point, the Fed is an independent entity, and I think Jerome Powell has been pretty clear. He's going to focus on the rate of interest rate changes based on what the economy is doing, what employment market's doing, and what inflation are doing. He's been pretty clear about that. I think that's the path he will continue to go on.
Okay, and before I let you go, DeepSeek, of course, has rocked the tech sector this week. NVIDIA's shares have dropped almost 15% in just the last 5 days. Is there an existential threat to American technology from Chinese AI?
Well, for investors on Monday, due to DeepSeek, it was definitely shoot first and ask questions later with the market reaction. The main question here has to do with the amount of capital expenditures we've seen on AI in the US. And given that DeepSeek is claiming that they can make these same products at a fraction of the cost, the question is, have we overspent on AI? And what does that mean for our return on investment for AI? I think the jury's still out there. But if you look at semiconductors, DeepSeek is saying that they were able to make this with older chips from NVIDIA. So I'm not surprised to see the poster child, NVIDIA, suffering because because of the news that's coming out on DeepSeek, I think that could be generally a negative for NVIDIA, but not necessarily a negative for AI demand or the semiconductor industry outside of NVIDIA. Because if anything, as we go open platform and costs are reduced, that's good for demand and good for consumers. So I think all of that is positive. But of course, the question is, have we overspent on AI and who are the winners and losers? We think Microsoft and Apple are winners here because Apple has the iPhone, which is they can easily put AI on that for low capital investment. And Microsoft has Microsoft Office and Copilot, so lower investment there.
Sarah Malik, fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining us. Now, Meta has agreed to pay $25 million to Donald Trump to settle a suit over the suspension of his social media accounts. The company has not admitted any wrongdoing. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, disabled Mr. Trump's accounts after the US Capitol riot 4 years ago. He sued the company at the end of his first term as president, accusing it of censorship. Now, speaking of Meta, it was one of the several technology giants that reported earnings overnight. For the October to December quarter, the company posted better than expected results, with revenue coming in at $48 billion. But it was Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg's positive comments on the company's AI initiatives that sent its stock higher in an extended trading. Zuckerberg said he believed that Meta's new AI initiatives would make it a world leader in the technology. Now, on the flip side, Tesla was out with a disappointing report card for the October to December quarter. The electric vehicle maker posted just a 2% rise in overall revenue from the year before, missing Wall Street's estimates. Its shares, though, ended up 4% in after-hours trading. Analysts say that Tesla could benefit from the chief executive Elon Musk's ties to the Trump administration, which may ease regulatory hurdles for projects like his self-driving software and robo-taxis. President Trump recently issued an executive order reversing several initiatives to promote the use of EVs. So let's bring in Carl Brewer, executive analyst at iSeeCars.com, to break it all down for us. Thank you for joining me, Carl. First of all, we saw shares drop in after-hours trading, then they picked up. Were you surprised by this roller coaster?
Not really. We always see the kind of Elon bounce, I kind of want to call it, when he gives his earnings call and he talks about things like Tesla becoming worth more than the next 5 highest technology companies' valuations, which I think would put it at around 15 trillion. So he had some impressive stories to tell, a lot of big claims, which he's known for. It's easy to want to kind of discount those, but this is also the guy who's figured out how to re-land rockets right on the launch pad. So you got to give him at least a bit of credit on some of these claims he's making.
Tesla, of course, though, facing huge threats from China. It was just over a year ago that we saw BYD overtaking Tesla as the world's largest EV maker. Do you think there's any chance of Tesla reclaiming that spot?
I don't think so, no. I think what we're seeing are obvious signs that future profit and advancements are not going to come in the car world, and not in the manufacturing world for Tesla. They're going to need breakthroughs in other areas. I think everyone knows this. Elon knows this, and that's why the bulk of his future, predictions on where Tesla's going are built around AI and robots and self-driving and robo-taxis.
Okay, and let's talk about the famous bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Do you think that that is going to help? We have, of course, seen Trump promising to cut EV credits and Biden's targets when it comes to EVs. What impact is this going to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, there's all these forces, and the lack of EV credits and the regulatory relaxing and the incentives are going to hurt the sales of EVs in general, and that includes Tesla. But I don't think it's a random that Elon has aligned himself with Trump. I think he sees that the next breakthrough comes in the form of advanced technologies like robo-taxis, and that he knows the regulatory hurdles are some of the toughest ones to get through there. And he's behind other companies that are doing this. But if he can weave his way through those regulations more rapidly than some of the other companies, maybe because he's got a friend at high places, that could give him back an advantage. And I think that's exactly where he's positioning the company, what we've seen.
Carl Brewer, executive analyst with iSeeCars.com. Thank you for joining me. That's it. It's all the time we have time for on this edition of Business Today. Just to let you know, markets in Asia more or less flat. We're seeing the ASX 200 up about a third of percent. Nikkei, on the other hand, edging lower. That's all we have time for. Thanks for watching.
I define populism as exploiting a grievance rather than solving it, as riding the anger rather than providing the answer.
Whatever time of night, Dave couldn't sleep at night, you go in the studio and you just create music, put something down if you had an idea.
I think every athlete goes through their end of their career in a very different way.
When big names talk, they talk to us.
This is BBC News with the latest news and results from around the globe in Sportsday.
Hello, welcome along to Sportsday. I'm Adam Wilde. A frantic night in the Champions League, but Manchester City edged through with victory over Bruges. Despite defeat, it's Liverpool who top the group after the league phase. All you need to know coming up in just a moment. Whilst elsewhere, Wales turned to the tried and tested for their Six Nations opener in Paris on Friday. Welcome along. Only one place to start. We knew it had the potential to be a dramatic final night in the Champions League with 18 ties all kicking off at the same time. And so it proved. Manchester City, champions 2 years ago. They had it all to do at home to Bruges, especially after going behind in the first half. But Pep Guardiola's side found a way through. A goal from Mateo Kovacic put them level shortly after the break. An own goal gave City the lead before the Brazilian Savinho gave them a 3-1 win. That's a result that sees them scrape through to the next phase on goal difference.
So it's an incredible lesson for all the club, for me first, for the players, for the club, that nothing is for granted and it's so difficult, everything. Look, Bruges, how incredible team they are. But yeah, today is okay. Congratulate the team because still they have pride, I never doubt about that, and we did it. We are there. In 2 weeks we'll be better than we are right now because new players come back, new signs. Against these two giants, one of them are going to play and we see what happens, how we arrive.
Plenty of drama too at Villa Park, where Aston Villa raced into a very early 2-goal lead against the Scottish side Celtic, both from Morgan Rogers inside 5 minutes. Celtic pinned them back at 2-2, but Ollie Watkins, who has today been the subject of transfer speculation, put Villa back in front from the penalty spot. That was before Rogers completed his hat-trick in stoppage time. 4-2 it finished. That result means Villa finish inside the top 8 and are automatically through to the last 16. Some result for them. Celtic go through to the playoffs where they'll play either Real Madrid or Bayern, depending on Friday's draw.
As a first priority is to try to get the last 16 directly. And of course, in Champions League, we are not contender to win at the end, but we want to enjoy, we want to compete, we want to be protagonists, we want to as well to show our capacity. And this is the most important objective I have with the players here in Champions League.
We've qualified on merit and showed some great football along the way. Aston Villa hadn't conceded a goal in their home games in the Champions League. So for us, we carried the threat right the way through the night. So yeah, really proud of the team. Supporters give us a great backing, and yeah, just unfortunate that we conceded the fourth late on with a mistake.
Well, Real Madrid will also go through to the playoff stage. A 3-0 win for them over French side Brest sees them finish 11th in the league phase table, missing out on the top 8 by just a point. 2 goals from Rodrigo and 1 from Jude Bellingham, so they are also into Friday's draw. So just confirmation then of how the top of the table looks after that really frantic final round of league group games. Liverpool top the table. That's despite losing 3-2 away at PSV. Barcelona finished second. They were held 2-2 at the Italian side Atalanta. Arsenal came from behind to beat Girona. They finished third. Inter, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Lille and Aston Villa are the other clubs who go straight through to the last 16. Below them, these are the sides that will have to go through a playoff phase if they want to progress. Really tight, as you can see, with Atalanta, who drew with Barcelona, last year's finalist Borussia Dortmund, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, who beat Slovan Bratislava, and Milan, who lost to Dinamo Zagreb, all finishing on 15 points. And down the bottom, there were real scenes of celebration from the Bruges players and fans, beaten by Manchester City, but they make it through to the next phase, along with Sporting, Celtic and Juventus, who were beaten 2-0 on the night by Benfica. And finally, these are the sides that haven't made it. Dinamo Zagreb, as I say, really unlucky to miss out on goal difference despite that victory over Milan. Stuttgart also might have gone through, but a heavy defeat to PSG has ended their hopes for this season's competition. Ousmane Dembele with a hat-trick in that one. All of those results, tables and the permutations for Friday's draw over on the BBC Sport website right now. Well, on Thursday, we do it all again, this time in the Europa League with 18 matches in the second tier of European competition. British sides Manchester United and Tottenham are looking good for the last 16. Rangers are also certain of the playoffs. Spurs have some good news ahead of their game at home to Elfsborg, with Mickey van der Ven returning after 6 weeks out with a hamstring problem. But they still have a long list of absentees, with supporters frustrated that they haven't used this transfer window to strengthen the squad.
I'd be disingenuous if I said anything other than right now there's nothing imminent, but that doesn't mean that, you know, there isn't opportunities being explored. Now, again, traditionally, the last few days of any window tend to be pretty frenetic. I'd expect us to be involved in that. Does that mean anything will get concluded? I can't commit to that because, again, I'm a bit of a distance from it, but you know, the information and the dialogue I have is that we're exploring all the opportunities to see if we can sort of, like I keep saying, bring some help in for the players.
Well, away from the football, winger Josh Adams and fullback Liam Williams are back in the Wales team for their opening Six Nations match against France in Paris on Friday. Daffy Jenkins, Wales captain in last year's competition, is also back in the side at lock. Wales are looking to put an end to a record 12 straight Test losses, which saw them handed the wooden spoon last year. Head coach Warren Gatland's position had been on the line after an autumn review, but the New Zealander has been backed by the Welsh Rugby Union to turn things around during this, his second stint in charge.
Ironically, I think there's more pressure on them, and there's probably not a huge amount of expectation, and more pressure on them because the expectation from their fans. They expect them to go out there and throw the ball around and score tries and entertain everyone.
It was quite a mixed bag for Scotland in the Six Nations last year. The highlight was winning the Calcutta Cup against England for the fourth year in a row, but they followed that up by losing to Italy. Forward Matt Fagerson played in that defeat in Rome and is again expected to be involved when they face the Italians at Murrayfield on Saturday.
It's a massive test. I think the first game, you've got to start well, and that's the first focus. I think something we've taken over the last 2-3 years is not looking too far ahead and not looking at the Six Nations results as a whole. It's you take it week by week and game by game, and they're a massive test. They did to us last year when we were out there, and we're obviously very disappointed coming away from that. So we know the challenge that's ahead of us, but it's one that we definitely want to right what happened last year.
Well, Gregor Townsend will name his Scotland starting 15 later on Thursday. France have already gone with theirs. Captain Antoine Dupont is back from his 7 sabbatical, which saw him win Olympic gold in Paris, and perhaps more significantly, after a terrible run of injuries, fly half Roman Ntamack is back 17 months after winning his last cap. Now, Northern Ireland golfer Tom McKibben has confirmed his move to Saudi-funded Live Golf, despite earning his PGA Tour card. He'll join John Rahm's Legion 13 team for the 4th season, which gets underway in Riyadh in February. McKibben was advised against joining Live Golf by his friend Rory McIlroy, who's warned against fatigue, arguing that too many golf tournaments are now being played.
I can see when the golf consumer might get a little fatigued of everything that's sort of available to them. So to scale it back a little bit and maybe have a little more scarcity in some of the stuff that we do, like the NFL, I think mightn't be a bad thing.
Well, McElroy there speaking ahead of the Pebble Beach Pro-Am that starts on Thursday. Scotty Scheffler is also playing in California. The world's #1 has missed 2 tournaments after a freak injury on Christmas Day. He needed surgery after cutting his right hand on a broken wine glass that he'd been using to try and shape pasta.
I can't live in a bubble, got to live my life, and accidents happen, and it could have been a lot worse. I actually talked to somebody who did the exact same thing, and the stem went straight through their hand. And so it's one of those deals where immediately after it happened, I was mad at myself because I was like, gosh, that was so stupid, but you just don't think about it when you're in the moment. I tried to push myself pretty hard in the cold last week, and it continued to get better and better each day, and so I figured I might as well come back out and start playing.
Before we go, just a recap of a really dramatic night of European football. The new format of the Champions League has seen 12 teams drop out, but it is Liverpool who top the table with last year's champions Manchester City scraping through to Friday's playoff draw. That is all your sport for now, here from the BBC Sports Centre. Goodbye.